My name is Claire Dawson, and I was 19 years old when my father told me that if I kept my baby, I was no longer welcome in his house. I still remember the exact way he said it. Not angry, not shouting, not emotional. Just cold, like he was discussing the weather, like he was talking about a stranger instead of his own daughter. At the time, I was 7 months pregnant, terrified, and completely alone. The baby's father had disappeared the moment he learned I was expecting. My mother refused to look at me, my older sister called me selfish, and my father had already decided that I had ruined the family's reputation. The only person who stood beside me was my grandfather. And because of that, everything that happened years later became possible. Before I tell you what happened next, please subscribe to Sad Drama Stories and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the people who abandon you first become the same people demanding a place in your life later. Back then, I believed family meant unconditional love. I was wrong. Sometimes family is simply a group of people who share your last name. Real family is the person who stays when everyone else leaves. For me, that person was my grandfather, Arthur Dawson. He was 71 years old when my parents threw me out. A retired mechanic, a widower, a man with rough hands and very few words, but he possessed something my parents never seemed to have: loyalty. The night everything fell apart, I stood on the front porch holding a duffel bag full of clothes and wondering where I would sleep. It was late November, cold enough to see my breath. I remember feeling numb, not from the weather, from the realization that my own parents were willing to abandon me. Then headlights appeared in the driveway. A pickup truck, my grandfather's pickup truck. He climbed out, looked at my bags, looked at my parents standing inside the doorway, and shook his head. That was all, just one disappointed shake of his head. Then he picked up my duffel bag and said 5 words. "Get in the truck, Claire." I got in, and I never lived with my parents again. Over the next 18 years, my grandfather helped me rebuild my life. He gave me a room, helped me raise my son Mason, worked extra jobs when money became tight, babysat while I attended college classes, never complained, never made me feel like a burden. Most importantly, he never treated Mason like a mistake. To him, Mason was simply his great-grandson. Nothing more needed to be said. Years passed. I finished school, built a career, bought a small house, raised an amazing son, and throughout all those years, my parents remained absent. No birthday cards, no Christmas gifts, no phone calls, nothing. My sister occasionally posted family photos online, vacations, holiday dinners, celebrations. There was never a place for me in any of them. At some point, I stopped expecting one. Life became easier that way. Then, 18 years after my grandfather rescued me, I received a phone call that changed everything. The hospital. My grandfather had suffered a stroke. I drove there immediately. But I was too late. He was gone. The strongest man I had ever known was gone. And standing beside his hospital bed, I felt more alone than I had since the night my parents forced me out. I thought losing him would be the hardest part. I was wrong. Because 3 weeks later, when his lawyer called and asked me to attend the reading of his estate documents, I discovered something my grandfather had never told me. Something that would bring my parents and sister crashing back into my life after nearly 2 decades of silence. And when the lawyer opened the file and read the first paragraph aloud, every person in that room turned to stare at me. Every person in the room turned to stare at me, including my parents, including my sister, including relatives I hadn't spoken to in nearly 20 years. The conference room suddenly felt smaller, hotter, harder to breathe in. I sat quietly at the far end of the polished oak table while my grandfather's attorney adjusted his glasses and looked down at the documents in front of him. His name was Thomas Bennett. He had handled my grandfather's legal affairs for years, the kind of man who looked like he ironed his socks. Calm, precise, professional, and completely immune to family drama, which was probably why my grandfather trusted him. The reading had started normally. A few personal gifts, some donations to charities, several instructions regarding family keepsakes. Nothing unusual. Then Mr. Bennett reached the section that changed the atmosphere in the room. He cleared his throat, opened a second folder, and began reading. To my granddaughter Claire Dawson, who stood beside me when others did not. The room immediately became silent. I felt my mother's eyes lock onto me, so did my father. Mr. Bennett continued. I leave my primary residence, all attached land, my investment accounts, and the remainder of my estate. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. I wasn't even sure I had heard him correctly. The remainder of his estate? That couldn't be right. My grandfather loved all of us. Even the people who hadn't treated him well, he wouldn't leave everything to me, would he? Then Mr. Bennett said the words that answered that question. The total estimated value is approximately $3.8 million. The room exploded, not literally, but close. Gasps, whispers, shock, disbelief. My sister Rachel actually stood up. What? Mr. Bennett calmly continued reading as if nothing had happened. But the damage was already done. Every face in the room had changed, especially my parents, because for the first time in 18 years they were looking directly at me. Not through me, not around me, at me, and I hated how familiar that felt. Rachel was the first to recover. This has to be a mistake. Mr. Bennett didn't even glance up. It is not. My father leaned forward. Arthur would never do that. The attorney finally looked at him. Your father signed these documents 3 years ago. Silence. 3 years ago, not recently, not under pressure, not while sick, 3 years ago. Meaning my grandfather had carefully planned every detail and he had never changed his mind. I wasn't thinking about the money. Honestly, I wasn't. I was thinking about him, the man who taught Mason how to fish. The man who showed up at every school play. The man who never forgot a birthday. The man who once worked 16 straight days so I could afford textbooks for college. That was the person I was mourning, not the estate. But judging by the expressions around the room, I seemed to be the only one. Rachel looked furious. My mother looked stunned. My father looked like someone had just stolen something from him. Then Rachel asked the question everyone was thinking. Why? Mr. Bennett nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that, because apparently he had. He opened another envelope. A sealed letter, one written in my grandfather's handwriting. The room immediately became quiet again. This letter was left with instructions to be read aloud if anyone questioned the estate distribution. My stomach tightened. I had never seen the letter before. Apparently nobody else had either. Mr. Bennett unfolded the paper, then started reading. And within seconds, tears filled my eyes because it sounded exactly like my grandfather, direct, honest, unapologetic. I left my estate to Claire because she was there. The room froze. Mr. Bennett continued. When she needed help, I helped her. Silence. When I needed help, she helped me. More silence. Relationships require participation. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The words hit every person in that room differently, but I knew exactly who they were aimed at. My parents, my sister, the people who vanished for 18 years. Then Mr. Bennett reached the final paragraph. And that's when things became much worse, because my grandfather had left behind something else, something nobody expected, something that made Rachel's face lose all color. Mr. Bennett looked directly at her, then read one final sentence. Regarding the matter Rachel believes nobody knows about, Rachel immediately stood up. Don't! But it was already too late. And judging by the expression on Mr. Bennett's face, my grandfather had been keeping a secret, one that was about to change everything. Rachel immediately stood up. Don't! The word came out sharper than she intended. Panic does that. It slips through the cracks before people can hide it. The room fell silent. Mr. Bennett lowered the letter slightly. For the first time since the reading began, he looked directly at my sister. Not angry, not surprised, just patient. Like a teacher waiting for a student to realize everyone already knows the answer. Rachel's face had gone completely pale. My father frowned. My mother looked confused. I was confused too. Because whatever secret my grandfather was talking about, I had never heard it. And judging by the reactions around the table, most of the family hadn't either. Rachel, my father said slowly, what is he talking about? No idea. The answer came too fast. Too rehearsed, too defensive. I felt a strange sensation settle into my stomach. The feeling you get when you're standing near a train track and can hear something coming long before you see it. Mr. Bennett calmly unfolded the second page. The letter specifically instructed me to continue. Rachel closed her eyes just for a second, but that second told me everything. She knew exactly what was coming. Mr. Bennett began reading again. 3 years ago, I discovered that a large sum of money disappeared from my accounts. The room immediately stiffened. Money changes conversations, always, especially family conversations. My father sat forward. Rachel stared at the table, and suddenly everyone was paying attention. It wasn't theft in the legal sense, Mr. Bennett continued. It was betrayal. Nobody moved. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, steady, slow, relentless. Then came the next sentence. The money was taken by someone I loved. Rachel's breathing visibly changed. Shallow, fast, nervous. My mother finally looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw uncertainty in her eyes. Mr. Bennett turned the page. Rachel came to me crying. Nobody spoke. She told me she was drowning in debt. The room froze. Rachel immediately stood. That's private. Mr. Bennett didn't stop reading. She said she would lose her house. Silence. She promised she would repay every dollar. More silence. I believed her. My grandfather's words hit me harder than I expected because they sounded exactly like him. Compassion first. Always, he would help anyone, especially family. That was who he was. The problem was that some people mistake kindness for weakness. My father looked stunned. You borrowed money from Dad? Rachel stared at the floor, no answer. My mother looked equally shocked. Apparently they hadn't known, or maybe they knew part of the story, not all of it. Mr. Bennett continued. The amount was $400,000. The room exploded, gasps, whispers, shock. $400,000. I felt like the air had been punched out of my lungs. My grandfather had never mentioned it, not once, not in 18 years, not during our weekly dinners, not during holidays. Not even when money was tight. He had protected Rachel's reputation, even after everything. Then came the worst part, the part that changed the room completely. Rachel never repaid a single dollar. Nobody moved. Nobody even blinked. Mr. Bennett read the next sentence. Instead, she purchased a lake property and 2 luxury vehicles. My father slowly turned toward Rachel. His expression looked unfamiliar. Not anger, disappointment. The deep kind, the painful kind, the kind that doesn't heal quickly. Rachel looked trapped, cornered, exposed, and the letter wasn't finished. Not even close. Mr. Bennett reached the final page. I forgave Rachel. Silence. But forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. The room became perfectly still. I knew that sentence, not the exact words, but the lesson. My grandfather used to say something similar all the time. People deserve second chances, not unlimited chances. Mr. Bennett continued reading. That is why my estate was left to Claire. My throat tightened. Claire never asked me for money. Silence. Claire never expected anything from me. More silence. Claire showed up. I felt tears gathering in my eyes because it wasn't about the inheritance. Not really, it never had been. It was about being seen. After 18 years of being treated like I didn't matter. My grandfather had seen everything, every sacrifice, every struggle, every lonely holiday, every difficult year. He had seen it all, and he had remembered. Then Rachel suddenly slammed both hands on the table. The sound echoed through the room. Everyone jumped. Her eyes were red. Her face was shaking. And when she spoke, the anger in her voice shocked everyone. You don't understand what really happened? The room went silent. Even Mr. Bennett stopped reading because whatever Rachel was about to say, it sounded like she had been waiting years to say it. And judging by the expression on her face, the truth was about to become much uglier. You don't understand what really happened. Rachel's voice shook as she stood at the end of the conference table. For a moment, nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The anger on her face was so intense that it seemed to suck all the air out of the room. My father stared at her. My mother looked frightened. And Mr. Bennett simply folded his hands and waited. Rachel laughed bitterly. A sharp, broken sound. Of course Grandpa made me the villain. The room remained silent, because nobody knew what to say to that, especially after learning about the $400,000. Then Rachel looked directly at me. And for the first time in nearly 20 years, I saw something I had never noticed before. Jealousy, not the casual kind, not the harmless kind. The kind that grows quietly for years until it poisons everything it touches. You think Claire was the only one who struggled? Rachel asked. Nobody answered. She didn't wait for one. I was drowning. Her voice cracked. My husband lost his business. Silence. We were behind on the mortgage. More silence. We were losing everything. I listened carefully. Because for the first time, Rachel wasn't talking about me. She was talking about herself. And honestly, part of me felt sorry for her. Life is hard, sometimes unbearably hard. I knew that better than most, but then she continued. And Dad wouldn't help. The room froze, my father's eyes widened. What? Rachel pointed across the table. I asked for help. Silence. You said no? My father looked genuinely confused, then hurt, then confused again. I didn't know things were that bad. Rachel laughed. You never asked. The words hit harder than anyone expected because they weren't entirely wrong. Families have a strange way of noticing some people while overlooking others. I knew that. I had lived it. Apparently Rachel had too, just differently. For 18 years I had been the forgotten daughter. Maybe Rachel had spent those same 18 years feeling invisible in her own way. The difference was what happened next. Because instead of accepting responsibility, she pointed at me. Again, this is all because of her. I closed my eyes. There it was, the real reason, not debt, not money, not inheritance. Me, I had been the target from the beginning. Rachel continued. Grandpa replaced me with Claire. The room remained silent. Nobody agreed, nobody defended her. She took that silence as permission to keep going. When Claire got pregnant, everyone talked about Claire. She pointed at me. When Claire moved in with Grandpa, everyone talked about Claire. Another point. When Claire went back to school, everyone talked about Claire. I felt exhausted listening to it because I remembered those years. Nobody was celebrating me. I was working 2 jobs, taking night classes, raising a child alone. Trying to survive. Those weren't victories. They were necessities, but Rachel had apparently been watching from a distance and seeing something completely different. She had seen attention, approval, love. The things she believed were being taken from her. My mother finally spoke. Rachel, her voice sounded fragile. Why didn't you tell us about the debt? Rachel looked at her and laughed again. This time there wasn't any humor in it. Would it have mattered? The question landed heavily. Nobody answered because honestly, nobody knew. Then Mr. Bennett quietly opened another folder. I immediately noticed Rachel's reaction. Panic. Instant panic. My stomach tightened. Because apparently the letter wasn't the only thing my grandfather had left behind. Mr. Bennett removed a sealed envelope, thicker than the others, much thicker. He adjusted his glasses, then spoke. There's one final instruction. Rachel's face lost all color. No, the word came out as a whisper. Mr. Bennett ignored her. This envelope contains documents Mr. Dawson requested be opened only if anyone contested the estate. The room became silent again. Dangerously silent. My father frowned. What documents? Mr. Bennett looked down at the envelope, then back at Rachel. And for the first time all day, I saw genuine sympathy in his eyes, not judgment, sympathy. As if he already knew what was inside and wished he didn't have to reveal it. Then he broke the seal, pulled out the first document, looked at it, and slowly shook his head. The gesture sent a chill down my spine. Because whatever he had just read, it was worse than the $400,000, much worse. Then he looked directly at Rachel and said 7 words that made her collapse back into her chair. Your grandfather knew about the forged signatures. The room went completely silent, not shocked, not confused. Silent. The kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly realizes they're standing much closer to the truth than they expected. Rachel looked like she had stopped breathing. My father stared at her. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. And I sat frozen in my chair trying to understand what I had just heard. Forged signatures, what signatures? Mr. Bennett placed the document carefully on the table. His expression remained professional, but even he seemed uncomfortable, as though he wished he didn't have to be the one revealing this. Rachel slowly shook her head. No, her voice barely worked. No, Mr. Bennett opened the file. 3 years ago, Mr. Dawson hired a private forensic accountant after noticing irregularities involving several financial documents. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The room was hanging on every word. The investigation revealed multiple forms submitted using Mr. Dawson's signature. Silence. However, those signatures were not authentic. My stomach tightened. I looked at Rachel. She looked terrified, not angry anymore, not defensive. Terrified. The difference mattered, because innocent people argue, guilty people panic. Mr. Bennett continued. The documents authorized access to additional investment funds. My father's face went pale. What documents? Mr. Bennett handed him copies. Dad looked down. His eyes widened immediately, then he looked at Rachel. Slowly. Like a man seeing someone he thought he knew for the very first time. "Rachel," his voice cracked. "What did you do?" Rachel stood so quickly her chair nearly fell over. "I was going to pay it back." The confession hit the room like an explosion. Nobody spoke because she had just admitted it, not directly, but enough, more than enough. She immediately realized her mistake. Her eyes widened. But the words were already out. You can't put toothpaste back in the tube. You can't take words back once they've escaped, and everyone in the room had heard them. I was desperate. Tears streamed down her face now, real tears. Not performative, not dramatic, desperate, broken. I thought I could fix it. Nobody answered because there was nothing to say. The facts were speaking for themselves. Mr. Bennett turned another page. Mr. Dawson chose not to pursue criminal charges. The room froze again. My grandfather knew. For 3 years he knew, and he never reported her, never called the police, never tried to destroy her life. He protected her. Even after she betrayed him, that sounded exactly like Grandpa. Too kind, too forgiving, too loyal, sometimes to the wrong people. Then Mr. Bennett read the next paragraph, and suddenly everything became much worse. Instead, Mr. Dawson privately repaid the affected accounts himself. My eyes widened. The room gasped. Rachel started crying harder because now everyone understood. Grandpa hadn't just forgiven her, he had sacrificed for her. Again, the same man who helped me raise Mason. The same man who fixed neighbors' cars for free. The same man who wore 10-year-old jackets because he hated wasting money. He had spent hundreds of thousands repairing damage Rachel created, and never told anyone. My mother suddenly began crying, not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears, because she was finally seeing something she had missed for years. While she was busy pretending I didn't exist, her father had been carrying a burden alone, a burden created by her own daughter. My father sat motionless, staring at the documents, reading them again, then again. Like he hoped the words would change, they didn't. Then Mr. Bennett opened the final envelope. The last one. The room immediately grew tense because everyone knew there was more, there had to be, otherwise Grandpa wouldn't have left instructions. Mr. Bennett carefully removed a small flash drive, a black one, nothing special except Rachel's reaction. The second she saw it, all color vanished from her face. Completely? "No," she whispered it, then louder. "No," my stomach dropped. Because people don't react like that to ordinary evidence. They react like that when they know exactly what's on it. Mr. Bennett looked directly at me, then at Rachel, then at the rest of the family, and finally spoke. "Mr. Dawson instructed me to play this recording only if Rachel challenged the estate." Rachel began shaking her head, over and over, tears pouring down her face. Because apparently my grandfather had anticipated this exact moment years ago, and whatever was on that recording, Rachel knew it would destroy the last defense she had left. Rachel began shaking her head, over and over. Tears streamed down her face. "No," her voice barely came out. "Please don't." The room was silent. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For the first time all afternoon, Rachel wasn't trying to defend herself. She wasn't making excuses. She wasn't blaming me. She wasn't blaming our parents. She wasn't blaming circumstances. She looked afraid, genuinely afraid, and that terrified me more than anything else that had happened. Because whatever was on that flash drive, she already knew. Mr. Bennett walked toward the conference room television, inserted the drive, clicked a few buttons. The screen flickered, then a video appeared. The date stamp in the corner immediately caught my attention. 3 years earlier. The same year Grandpa changed his will. The same year he discovered the missing money. The same year everything seemed to begin. The video showed my grandfather sitting at his kitchen table. Alone, a cup of coffee beside him, a yellow legal pad in front of him. For a moment nobody spoke. Then Grandpa looked directly into the camera and smiled. The sight almost broke me because I hadn't seen that smile since the hospital. "If you're watching this," he began, then Rachel decided not to let things go. The room froze. Rachel started crying harder. Grandpa sighed. Not angrily, sadly, like a man who already knew how the story ended. "I hoped this recording would never be necessary." Silence. "I hoped my family would choose peace." More silence. "But hope isn't a plan." That sounded exactly like him, practical, direct. honest. Grandpa folded his hands, then looked directly into the camera again. Rachel, if you're seeing this, I want you to know something. The room seemed to stop breathing. I loved you, Rachel lowered her head. I still love you, more tears. But love doesn't erase responsibility. Nobody moved, nobody even blinked, because every word was landing exactly where it was supposed to. Then Grandpa picked up a folder, the same kind of folder that had been sitting in front of Mr. Bennet all afternoon. I kept records. A small smile crossed his face. Claire isn't the only one who does that. Despite everything happening, I almost laughed. That sounded exactly like something he would say. Then his expression became serious again. I documented every loan. Silence. Every transfer. More silence. Every promise. The room remained frozen. Then he opened the folder and everything changed. Inside were copies of emails, bank transfers, signed agreements, text messages, years of evidence. Meticulously organized. Every page, every date, every conversation. Rachel stared at the screen in horror because Grandpa hadn't just recorded what happened. He had preserved everything, and he had done it quietly, patiently, for years. Then came the recording that changed the room forever. A phone conversation, Rachel's voice clear as day. The date appeared in the corner almost 3 years earlier. Everyone listened. Rachel was speaking to someone, a friend apparently. And what she said made my mother's face turn white. I know Grandpa will cover it. Silence. I'll tell him it's an emergency. More silence. He always falls for that. The room froze. Rachel immediately buried her face in her hands. Because it got worse, much worse, the recording continued. He'd never call the police. She laughed, actually laughed. He's too soft. The words echoed through the room like a gunshot. My mother started crying, harder now. Because suddenly this wasn't about financial mistakes, or desperation, or bad decisions. This was manipulation, calculated manipulation, the deliberate exploitation of a man who loved her, and everyone could hear it. Then the video returned to Grandpa. He looked older somehow, tired, heartbroken, but calm, very calm. If you're watching this, he said, then the family deserves the truth. The room became silent again. Then Grandpa said something that made my chest tighten, something directed at me, specifically me. Claire. My eyes filled with tears. Thank you. Silence. For showing up. More silence. For staying. The room blurred. I couldn't stop crying now, neither could my mother. Then Grandpa smiled one final time and delivered the sentence that left everyone speechless. There's one more thing nobody knows. The room froze. Even Rachel looked up, confused. Because apparently there was still another secret, another truth, another surprise, and judging by Grandpa's expression, it was the biggest one of all. The room froze. Even Rachel looked up, confused. Because for the first time that afternoon, she genuinely didn't know what was coming. I didn't know either. Neither did my parents. Neither did Mr. Bennet. Apparently whatever Grandpa was about to reveal had remained a secret from everyone. The video continued. Grandpa smiled softly, the same smile he used whenever he was about to tell a story, the same smile that made me feel safe when life was falling apart. Then he spoke. Claire always thought I saved her. My throat tightened. The room remained silent. But the truth is, he paused, she saved me. I felt tears immediately fill my eyes. Grandpa leaned back in his chair, looking directly into the camera. Looking directly at me. When my wife died, I was lonely. Silence. The kind of lonely people don't talk about. More silence. The house was quiet. The room remained still. I ate dinner alone. My chest hurt listening to him. Because I remembered those years. I remembered how empty he seemed after Grandma passed away. I remembered how often he sat on the porch staring into space. Back then I thought he was grieving. I never realized how deep it went. Then Grandpa smiled again. Then Claire arrived. Tears streamed down my face, not quietly, not politely. I couldn't stop them, neither could my mother. Everyone says I rescued my granddaughter. Grandpa shook his head. No, silence. She rescued me? The room was completely still. Even Rachel stopped crying. Everyone was listening. Because for the first time all day, this wasn't about money or betrayal or inheritance. It was about love. When Claire moved in, the house became alive again. More tears. Suddenly there was laughter, silence. There was a baby learning to walk. My heart nearly broke. There were school projects on the kitchen table, more silence. There were birthday cakes. The room blurred through my tears because I remembered all of it. Every moment, every holiday, every ordinary Tuesday night, the things that seemed small at the time, the things that turned out to be everything. Then Grandpa looked directly into the camera. That's why she inherited my estate. The room remained silent, not because people were shocked anymore, because they finally understood. This had never been a reward, it had never been a prize. It had never been about money, it was about gratitude, about showing up, about staying, about being family when it mattered. Then Grandpa said something I will never forget. The people who love you during your worst years are usually the people who deserve to be there during your best years. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The truth of that sentence filled the room. Then came the final surprise, the one nobody expected. Grandpa reached into a drawer beside him, pulled out a small wooden box, and smiled. "Mr. Bennett knows where this is." The attorney immediately nodded. Apparently he did. "The box belongs to Mason, my son." I looked up instantly. The room did too. Grandpa smiled. "My great-grandson." Tears filled my eyes again. Because Mason had adored him, absolutely adored him. Inside the box, Grandpa explained, were letters, one letter for every birthday he expected to miss. Advice, stories, memories, life lessons. Messages written specifically for Mason. For ages 18 through 30, 13 letters, handwritten, personal, prepared years in advance. The room became emotional immediately. Even my father wiped his eyes. The video ended a few minutes later, not dramatically. Not with a final revelation, just Grandpa smiling, then saying 4 simple words. "I had a good life." The screen went black and the room remained silent. Nobody challenged the estate, nobody argued, nobody protested. Not after that, there wasn't anything left to say, the truth had already spoken. Over the following months, things changed. My parents apologized, not perfectly, not immediately, but sincerely. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, they accepted responsibility for abandoning me. Healing wasn't instant. Some wounds take years, but it started, and sometimes that's enough. Rachel eventually entered financial counseling. We aren't close, maybe we never will be, but I hope she finds peace. I truly do, because carrying that much bitterness is its own punishment. As for me, I kept the house. I kept the letters. And every year on Mason's birthday, we open one together. Sometimes we laugh, sometimes we cry, sometimes both, but every letter reminds us of the same thing. Love isn't proven by what people say, it's proven by who stays. That's my story, a story about family, forgiveness, betrayal, and a grandfather who saw the truth long before anyone else. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a comment and let me know what you would have done in my situation. And don't forget to subscribe to Sad Drama Stories for more emotional family dramas, shocking family secrets, and unforgettable endings. I'll see you in the next story.